In the arid Texas mountains, where the wind carries grains of red sand and the sun beats down relentlessly, Hank Morrison has lived in isolation for over a decade. His time-worn wooden cabin sits miles from the nearest town, surrounded only by cacti and rocks. An ex-army veteran, he found refuge from the scars of war in solitude. That July morning, as he walked the dusty trail to check his traps, he heard a sound he didn't expect, a woman's desperate crying. Among the dry bushes, a young woman with brown hair held a baby blanket close to her chest, rocking back and forth as tears streamed down her sunburned face. Emily Thompson, just 22 years old, had lost her 2-year-old son during the night. The young woman explained between sobs that she had stopped to rest near a creek with little Jake, fleeing a violent situation at home. During the early morning, she woke to find the child had disappeared without a trace. Hank observed Emily's red eyes, recognizing a desperation he knew well. His calloused hands held her trembling shoulders as she spoke of her violent ex-partner who was pursuing her. The hot Texas wind blew between them, kicking up dust that clung to the sweat on their faces. Hank made a decision that would change both their lives. He would help Emily find her son, even though it meant breaking years of voluntary isolation. Something in his faded blue eyes lit up again. The two began their search, traversing rocky trails where only lizards and snakes usually traveled. Hank used his military experience to track tiny footprints in the dry earth, while Emily called out her son's name until she was hoarse. The 100-degree heat made every step torture, and the water in their canteens quickly dwindled. They encountered locals who watched them with suspicion, some refusing to help when they learned Emily was fleeing a domestic dispute. An elderly rancher mentioned seeing strangers in the area, men who didn't belong in those arid lands. The tension grew with each passing hour, and Hank noticed Emily beginning to crumble physically and emotionally. He needed to find Jake before the Texas desert claimed its deadly toll on them both. As the sun began to set, painting the sky orange and red, they found an abandoned ranch where smoke rose from a makeshift chimney. Male voices echoed from inside, and Hank immediately recognized the danger. They were smugglers using children to transport drugs across the border, preying on lost boys like Jake. Emily wanted to run towards the ranch, but Hank held her back firmly, explaining they needed a strategy. He had faced similar situations in Afghanistan and knew impulsiveness could cost everyone their lives. They watched through broken windows and saw Jake tied to a chair, crying silently. The rage Hank felt burned hotter than the Texas desert sun that was beginning to hide on the horizon. Using military tactics, Hank created a distraction by setting fire to a nearby barn, while Emily approached from the rear. The smugglers rushed out to put out the fire, leaving Jake momentarily alone. Emily managed to free her son and run to Hank's pickup truck, but they were pursued for miles along the Texas dirt roads. The old engine roared as bullets whizzed past the back windows. Hank drove like a man possessed, swerving to avoid rocks and potholes on the dusty road. When they finally lost their pursuers in the mountains, they stopped near an abandoned gas station. Emily hugged Jake to her chest, feeling his small heart beat rapidly, while Hank checked for injuries. The silence of the desert had never been so comforting. 3 days later, on Hank's cabin porch, Emily brewed tea while Jake played with colorful stones he'd found in the yard. The ex-soldier watched the scene with a smile he'd forgotten he was capable of forming. Emily had decided to start a new life in Texas, far from her violent past, and Hank offered to help her find work in the nearby town. Jake ran to him, calling him Uncle Hank, and for the first time in years, the lonely man felt his life had purpose again. The wind still blew through the dry mountains, but now it carried hope instead of solitude. As the sun set once more over the Texas desert, the three shared a simple meal, united by an experience that had transformed their lives forever. 2 weeks had passed since the rescue, and the routine at Hank's cabin had completely changed. Emily woke early to make coffee while Jake explored the rocky yard, collecting small treasures only a child can see. Hank taught the boy how to identify animal tracks in the red sand and which desert plants were safe to touch. The young mother watched these lessons with gratitude, seeing her son smile for the first time in months. During the scorching afternoons, when the thermometer read 115 degrees, they took refuge in the shade of the porch, where Hank told stories of his youth in Texas. Emily began to notice details in the cabin's simple decor: old photographs tucked away in drawers, dusty military medals, and a wooden cradle covered by a tarp in the corner of the main bedroom. One Saturday morning, while Emily was washing clothes in the makeshift outdoor tub, Jake came running to her holding a yellowed photograph. It was an image of a younger Hank in uniform, next to a blonde woman holding a baby in her arms. When Emily asked about the photo, Hank was silent for long minutes, gazing at the horizon where the mountains blurred into the morning mist. Finally, with a choked voice, he told her about Sarah, his wife, and Tommy, the son he lost in a car accident while he was serving overseas. The weight of guilt had brought him to these isolated mountains, where he tried to forget the pain of not having been there when his family needed him most. Emily then understood why Hank had risked everything to save Jake, and why he treated the boy with such affection and protection. The temporary peace was interrupted when an unknown vehicle appeared on the dirt road leading to the cabin. Emily immediately recognized the black pickup truck of Marcus, her violent ex-partner, who had pursued her across 3 states. The man got out of the vehicle with 2 other men, all armed and with menacing expressions. Hank ordered Emily and Jake to hide in the cabin's makeshift cellar while he confronted the unwelcome visitors. Marcus shouted, demanding Emily return with him, claiming rights over Jake that he did not legally possess. The ex-soldier remained calm, positioning himself strategically between the men and the house's entrance. His experienced hands firmly gripped the rifle he hadn't used in years, but his military knowledge remained intact in his memory. The tension in the hot Texas air was palpable, like electricity before a storm. The confrontation quickly escalated when Marcus tried to force his way into the cabin. Hank fired a warning shot into the air, sending desert birds flying in a panic. The men momentarily recoiled, but Marcus was determined not to leave empty-handed. For 20 minutes that felt like hours. The 2 groups remained in a tense standoff, with weapons pointed and threatening words exchanged under the relentless sun. Emily, hidden in the cellar with Jake, whispered prayers as she listened to the shouting outside. Hank knew he needed to resolve the situation without bloodshed, especially with a child present. When Marcus finally lost patience and charged, Hank used his hand-to-hand combat skills to disarm him, while the other 2 men fled in a panic, realizing they had completely underestimated the solitary ex-veteran. After tying Marcus with ropes used for cattle, Hank called the local sheriff, who arrived an hour later accompanied by 2 deputies. Emily finally emerged from hiding with Jake, trembling but relieved to see they were safe. Marcus was arrested for trespassing, threats, and violating a restraining order Emily had obtained against him in another state. The sheriff, a 60-year-old man who had known Hank for decades, praised how the situation was handled without excessive violence. As the black pickup was towed away and Marcus was led off in handcuffs, Emily felt truly free for the first time in years. Jake ran into Hank's arms, who lifted him into the air as the boy laughed loudly, a sound that echoed through the dry mountains like long-forgotten music. The threat that had pursued them had finally vanished forever. 3 months later, Emily had found work as a nurse at the nearby town hospital, and Jake was attending the local school where he quickly made friends. Hank renovated a room in the cabin for them to have privacy, but he found he no longer felt the need for solitude that had brought him to the mountains. On cool Texas autumn nights, the 3 would sit on the porch to watch the stars, as Jake asked 1,000 questions about constellations, and Hank rediscovered the joy of being needed again. Emily noticed that the lonely man had started to smile more frequently, and was even considering the possibility of visiting town regularly. The photograph of Sarah and Tommy now shared shelf space with new pictures of the 3 of them together, and the dusty cradle was transformed into a game table where Jake put together puzzles. What had started as a casual encounter on a dusty trail had become an unlikely family, united by adversity and strengthened by the unconditional love they found in each other. Winter arrived in the Texas mountains, bringing frigid winds that whistled through the rocks and temperatures that plummeted during the early hours of the morning. Hank installed a wood-burning stove in the main living area of the cabin, creating a cozy atmosphere where Jake enjoyed playing with his makeshift toys made of wood and stones. Emily had completely adapted to country life, learning to preserve food, and even to sew clothes for Jake with fabrics she bought in town. During the long, cold afternoons, she read books borrowed from the local library, while Hank taught Jake to carve small wooden figures. The simple routine brought a peace none of them had experienced before. On starry nights, when the biting cold made the air crystal clear, they gathered by the fireplace to share stories and plans for the future, creating memories that would last forever. Jake turned 3 with a simple but memorable party at the cabin, featuring a cake made by Emily and handmade presents Hank had worked on for weeks. The boy received a hand-painted wooden horse and a collection of children's storybooks Emily had bought with her savings. During the celebration, some local neighbors who had become friends with the makeshift family arrived, bringing typical Texas dishes and guitars to liven up the evening. Hank watched Jake blow out the candles with a smile that lit up his entire face, weathered by the sun and life's difficult experiences. Emily realized at that moment how much Hank had transformed since she first met them, from a man embittered by solitude to someone radiating paternal affection. The party extended late into the night, with country music echoing through the silent mountains, under a sky full of bright stars. Spring brought significant changes for the small family. Emily received an offer to become a nursing supervisor at the hospital, which meant greater financial stability and professional recognition. Jake had excelled in school, demonstrating above-average intelligence and artistic skills, inherited from afternoons spent watching Hank work with wood. Hank decided to formalize his situation as Jake's legal guardian, a process Emily fully supported, recognizing the genuine love that existed between the two. On weekends, they explored more distant trails in the mountains, where Hank taught Jake about Texas wilderness and Emily collected wildflowers to decorate the cabin. The transformation was visible in everyone. Emily had gained confidence and serenity, Jake grew strong and happy, and Hank rediscovered the meaning of true family. An unexpected event tested the family's bond again when Emily received an official letter informing her that she had inherited a small property from her deceased grandmother in Austin. The inheritance included a modest but well-located house and a sum of money that could secure Jake's college future. Emily was torn between the opportunity to provide better conditions for her son and leaving the simple but happy life they had built in the mountains. For days, she discussed the possibilities with Hank, while Jake continued to play, oblivious to the adult's decisions that would define his future. Hank, demonstrating the wisdom acquired over the years, encouraged Emily to seriously consider the move, even if it meant being alone again. He knew that true love sometimes requires sacrifices, and Jake's future was more important than his own solitude. After weeks of reflection, Emily made a decision that surprised everyone. She would sell the inherited property in Austin and use the money to expand the cabin in the mountains, creating a small rural tourism business that would leverage Hank's knowledge of the region. The idea was to offer authentic experiences for visitors interested in experiencing Texas country life, with Hank as the guide and Emily managing the accommodations. Jake was excited about the prospect of meeting new people while maintaining his life in the mountains that he loved so much. Hank initially resisted the idea, fearing that strangers would disturb his peace, but gradually warmed to the proposal when he realized he could share his passion for the wild. The project represented a sustainable future for the family, combining each person's unique skills in a common endeavor that would further strengthen their bonds. 2 years later, Hank's Mountain had become a known destination among nature lovers seeking authentic Texas experiences. Emily managed reservations and cared for guests with the same dedication she showed at the hospital, while Hank led educational trails, and Jake, now 5, charmed visitors with his captivating personality and precocious knowledge of wildlife. The original cabin had been expanded with 2 guest rooms and a larger kitchen, but maintained the rustic charm that made it special. During the evenings when visitors departed, the family gathered on the porch to watch the sunset paint the mountains gold and orange. Hank held Jake on his lap, while Emily rested her head on his shoulder, forming a picture of simple but profound happiness. The lonely man who had found a young woman crying on a dusty trail had discovered that saving someone can mean saving oneself. The arrival of summer brought the busiest season to Hank's Mountain, with families from all over Texas seeking refuge from the urban heat in the cool mountains. Jake, now 5, had become a minor celebrity among the guests, telling stories about local animals and showing off his collection of rocks and fossils found during hikes. Emily developed a special talent for regional cuisine, preparing traditional Texan dishes that made visitors return year after year. Hank discovered an unexpected passion for teaching, sharing knowledge about desert survival and local history, with groups fascinated by his experiences. During the silent early mornings, before guests woke, the three still kept their intimate routine of coffee on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the rocks golden while planning the day's activities. A special event profoundly marked that summer, when a family from Chicago arrived with a boy Jake's age, who had lost his father in an accident. The single mother, Patricia, was looking for a quiet place to help her son Tommy process his grief, and found more than she expected at Hank's Mountain. Jake immediately connected with Tommy, sharing his toys and showing him the secret corners of the property where he used to play. Emily offered emotional support to Patricia, who recognized in her hostess someone who had also been through difficult times. Hank, observing the interaction between the two boys, remembered his own Tommy lost so many years ago, but this time the memory brought peace instead of pain. During the week they stayed on the mountain, the two families formed a lasting friendship that would extend far beyond that visit. Autumn arrived, bringing vibrant colors to the sparse trees of the mountains and a calmer pace to the lodge. Emily used the less busy period to dedicate herself to a personal project, writing a book about her journey as a runaway single mother who found redemption in the Texas mountains. Hank built a small workshop where he began creating rustic furniture and wooden toys that they sold in the lodge's gift shop. Jake started attending a rural school 15 miles from the property, making new friends, but always eager to return home to the mountains. During autumn afternoons, when the cool wind carried the scent of dry leaves, the three worked together in the garden Emily had planted, harvesting vegetables and planning improvements for the next season. The harmony they had achieved seemed unshakable, built on solid foundations of love and mutual respect. Winter brought an unexpected surprise when Patricia and Tommy returned to spend Christmas in the mountains, this time accompanied by the boys' grandmother. Emily prepared a special supper with roasted turkey and all the Texan Christmas traditions, while Hank cut down a small tree that they decorated with handmade ornaments made by Jake. The house was filled with children's laughter, lively conversations between the adults, and the cozy warmth of the crackling fireplace during the frosty nights. Tommy had visibly transformed since his last visit, showing more joy and confidence, a result of his special friendship with Jake and the loving environment he had found on the mountain. On Christmas Eve, while the children slept exhausted after a day filled with playing in the snow that rarely fell in that region, the adults shared stories of overcoming adversity and gratitude for the family they had chosen to form. Jake's spring at 6 years old marked an important milestone when he expressed the desire to officially call Hank Daddy. Emily was moved to see how the relationship between the two had evolved naturally, without forcing situations or creating unrealistic expectations. Hank, initially surprised, felt a profound happiness he hadn't experienced since the loss of his original family. The adoption process began with the enthusiastic support of the entire local community, which had witnessed the positive transformation of the makeshift family over the years. During the court hearing, Jake firmly held Emily's and Hank's hands, looking seriously at the judge as he legally formalized what already existed in everyone's hearts. When they left the courthouse as an officially recognized family, they celebrated with a picnic in the mountains where it all began, at the exact spot where Hank had found Emily crying 4 years prior. Years later, Jake became a confident and responsible 17-year-old, dividing his time between studying for university and helping to manage the family lodge that had expanded significantly. Emily published her autobiographical book, which became a regional bestseller and brought even more visitors interested in learning the real story behind Hank's Mountain. Hank, now officially a father and a grandfather at heart to 3 grandchildren that Patricia and Tommy gave him, continued leading trails with the same passion as in the early days. During a golden spring afternoon, as they watched Jake teach survival techniques to a group of visiting Boy Scouts, Emily and Hank reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them together. The lonely man who once found a desperate young woman crying for her child had discovered that saving a life can mean finding one's own reason for living, and that the strongest families are those chosen by the heart.